The courthouse was alive with its usual hum of activity, the kind that made the walls seem as though they held their own heartbeat. Lawyers hurried through the marble corridors, briefcases clutched tightly under arms, their polished shoes echoing sharply against the floors. Plaintiffs and witnesses lingered in the waiting areas, some pacing nervously, some whispering in hushed tones about their cases. Spectators filled the benches, some curious, some there simply because the courtrooms often carried stories stranger than fiction. Lila walked into this world quietly, almost like a shadow slipping between the crowds. She was dressed plainly, her coat slightly worn and her shoes practical rather than stylish. Her briefcase, scuffed at the corners, swung gently at her side. She did not command attention the way the other attorneys did, those who wore sharp suits and projected confidence like armor. She seemed small in comparison, fragile even, and yet her eyes were alive with a calm focus that seemed to notice everything. The security officer gave her a polite nod as she passed, used to people hurrying, stopping, or complaining, but she moved with an ease that seemed unaffected by the chaos. She entered the courtroom, her steps measured, eyes briefly scanning the space. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and old paper, a scent that somehow carried authority. The judge, an older man with silver hair and a reputation for impatience, barely glanced at her before resuming his reading of the case notes. As she approached the podium, the judge finally lifted his eyes and a smirk crossed his face. He was used to seeing nervous litigants, people who fumbled over words and stumbled under scrutiny. Lila, with her quiet demeanor and unassuming appearance, seemed like just another one of them. He leaned back in his chair slightly, his expression a mix of amusement and mild contempt. He did not yet know that his assumptions were about to be shattered. The courtroom settled into a tense rhythm. The opposing lawyer, a tall man with a booming voice, prepared his notes, confident that this case would be straightforward. He glanced at Lila and raised an eyebrow, sharing an unspoken understanding with the judge. She appeared fragile, uncertain, and inexperienced. A few spectators whispered among themselves, commenting quietly on her appearance, their assumptions echoing the judge's silent judgment. Lila opened her briefcase carefully, pulling out a few papers, her hands steady. She did not rush. There was no need to impress anyone with showy gestures. Her voice, soft but clear, carried as she began to introduce herself and her client. At first it sounded almost hesitant, a little unsure, the way someone might sound when speaking in front of authority figures for the first time. The judge's smirk widened slightly, the corners of his eyes crinkling with the expectation of error. Yet even as she spoke, there were small signs that she was paying attention to everything around her. She noted how the opposing counsel positioned his arguments, how witnesses fidgeted when certain questions were asked, how the subtle tone of the judge's voice suggested impatience or doubt. Her eyes flicked from one detail to another, absorbing information with quiet intensity. To the casual observer, it might have seemed like simple curiosity, but in truth she was analyzing, calculating, and preparing. The judge interrupted her politely at first, asking basic questions meant to gauge her understanding of the courtroom procedures. She answered simply and directly, never overcomplicating her words but never hesitating. Each response was measured, precise, careful not to reveal the depth of her knowledge. The judge's smirk faltered slightly, though he did not yet admit it. He expected someone nervous to falter or stumble, yet she responded calmly and with clarity, though it seemed ordinary to anyone not paying close attention. As the opposing lawyer began his presentation, Lila listened intently. She did not interrupt, did not react outwardly to his points. Instead, she took quiet notes, marking inconsistencies, gaps in logic, and areas where the argument was weak. The judge, noticing her quiet focus, assumed it was simple diligence, a good habit perhaps, but nothing extraordinary. He leaned back in his chair, certain that any moment of hesitation would reveal her limitations. The spectators watched with mild interest, some shifting in their seats as the proceedings unfolded. A few noticed the contrast between Lila's quiet demeanor and the confident posturing of the other lawyers. They exchanged glances, whispering quietly, sensing a subtle difference that they could not quite name. Lila seemed ordinary, yet there was a tension about her that drew attention in a way that was not boastful, but quietly compelling. As the trial progressed, Lila's eyes continued to scan the room, noting every reaction. She observed how the witnesses reacted to each question, How the opposing counsel changed tone slightly when a weak point was hinted at. How the judge's expressions shifted when particular phrases were used. She cataloged it all silently, creating a mental map of the courtroom dynamics, readying herself for the moments when she would have to intervene. There was a rhythm to the courtroom, a push and pull of arguments, objections, and responses. Lila moved with that rhythm, adapting without drawing attention to herself. When the judge interjected with questions that were meant to catch her off guard, she answered with simplicity, her words clear and direct, never defensive. To the judge, it was an unremarkable display, but the calmness in her responses hinted at a mind that was quietly orchestrating much more than anyone could see. During a recess, she quietly reviewed her notes, notepad in hand, fingers tracing lines with care. She did not speak loudly, did not seek attention, yet her focus was intense, bordering on commanding. Others in the room occasionally glanced at her, wondering why someone so plain and soft-spoken seemed so unshakably confident. There was no arrogance in her demeanor, no need to dominate the room, only a quiet, unwavering attention to the details that mattered. When the trial resumed, the judge returned to his seat, still confident in his initial assessment. He had a reputation for being sharp, yet his mind was colored by appearances. Lila's plain clothes, modest gestures, and quiet voice led him to assume she was simple, untrained, someone who might make mistakes under pressure. He did not yet realize that the most important parts of the trial, the moments where true skill would be revealed, were still ahead. As the opposing counsel began to build what he thought was an airtight case, Lila listened, her pen moving swiftly across the pages of her notepad. She noted contradictions, small errors, and assumptions that had gone unchallenged. Each detail was like a puzzle piece slowly coming together in her mind. The courtroom, meanwhile, remained oblivious to the storm of intellect quietly building before them. The judge occasionally glanced at her, expecting signs of confusion or hesitation, yet found none. Lila's composure remained unbroken, her responses measured and deliberate. She did not speak unless necessary, did not draw attention to herself unnecessarily. There was a grace in her restraint, a sense that she understood the importance of timing, of waiting for the right moment to reveal what she knew. By the end of the morning session, whispers began to circulate among the spectators. Some remarked on her calmness, others on the precision of her notes. A few speculated quietly, wondering if there was more to her than met the eye. Yet the judge, stubborn in his assumptions, smiled confidently, believing that the trial had merely begun and that her simplicity would soon be exposed. Lila gathered her belongings as the session adjourned, her movements deliberate but unhurried. She did not speak much, offering polite nods when approached, never drawing attention to herself. The impression she left was one of quiet humility, almost fragility, yet beneath that exterior, her mind was alive with strategy and understanding. She had listened, observed, and prepared, and the moments ahead would test not only her legal skill, but her ability to surprise and astonish everyone in that courtroom. Outside the courtroom, she paused briefly, looking at the marble steps and the crowd that milled about. The sunlight reflected off the polished surfaces, casting a glow that seemed to highlight the seriousness of the day. She took a deep breath, not in nervousness but in preparation, knowing that the next hours would demand everything she had quietly honed over years of practice, study, and observation. In that moment, she was both invisible and omnipotent, a quiet force ready to change the perceptions of everyone around her. The first part of the trial had ended, but for Lila, it had only just begun. The judge's smirk, the opposing lawyer's confidence, the whispers of the spectators, all were elements in a game she had been trained to play. Her humility was her disguise, her simplicity a strategy, and behind that calm exterior was a mind ready to astonish, challenge, and overturn every expectation placed upon her. As the courtroom emptied and voices faded, Lila remained poised, a quiet storm waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the courtroom reconvened after the break, there was a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Lawyers straightened their suits, witnesses fidgeted slightly, and the judge tapped his gavel with practiced precision. Lila entered quietly, carrying the same calm composure as before. No one could tell from her simple appearance that the hours ahead would reveal her remarkable skills. The judge, still holding on to his previous impressions, glanced at her and made a small condescending remark about her. Preparation, Lila responded politely, nodding, and answered his questions with clear but simple words. She seemed unassuming, yet her mind was already calculating, assessing how to navigate the arguments to come. Each word she chose was deliberate, designed to convey just enough understanding without revealing the depth of her expertise. The opposing lawyer continued with confidence, outlining his case as if victory were already secured. He spoke quickly, his tone firm and commanding, expecting Lila to falter under the pressure. But she listened attentively, taking in every detail, noticing the subtle hesitations in his voice, the slight inconsistencies in his argument, and the points where he overestimated his own position. Lila's notes were precise, and she highlighted the parts of the case that could be challenged. To the casual observer, she appeared to be quietly jotting down information, but in reality she was weaving a strategy that would turn the trial in her favor. She knew that patience was her strength. By staying calm and observing everything, she was building a foundation to reveal her true capability at the perfect moment. The judge interjected several times, asking her basic questions. Each time she answered with humility and politeness, giving the impression of someone who was learning on the job. His smirk never faded, though a small shadow of doubt began to appear in his eyes. There was something unusual about her. She remained steady, unfazed, and attentive even under the direct scrutiny of the court. As the trial progressed, Lila began to gently point out flaws in the opposing lawyer's arguments. She phrased her observations carefully, almost as if she were asking questions rather than making statements. At first, the judge and the spectators barely noticed the significance of her words. They seemed simple, direct, and non-threatening. But behind each sentence was a carefully constructed analysis, demonstrating her understanding of legal principles and precedents far beyond what anyone expected from someone of her appearance. The opposing lawyer, confident at first, started to show signs of frustration. He had expected Lila to struggle, to stumble over her words or misunderstand the case. Instead, she was subtly dismantling his points, exposing gaps and contradictions. Her calm demeanor made her words even more powerful. Each correction or clarification was delivered without arrogance, making the court realize slowly that she was not ordinary. Spectators began to murmur quietly, noticing the shift in energy. The whispers spread like wildfire as people started to understand that the woman they had dismissed was anything but simple. She maintained a quiet presence, never raising her voice unnecessarily. Yet every comment she made carried weight and authority. Her focus was unwavering, and her ability to remain composed under pressure fascinated those watching. Lila began to reference past cases and legal precedents, but she explained them in plain language that everyone could understand. This approach made her brilliance accessible and relatable, contrasting with the usual technical jargon that often confounded spectators. People started leaning forward in their seats, paying close attention, surprised at how much impact her words had despite her modest presentation. The judge, growing increasingly unsettled, attempted to regain control of the courtroom with his authority and sharp questions. Yet every time he tried to challenge her, she responded with clarity and logic, never appearing flustered. The more he tried to provoke her, the more composed she became. It was as if she had anticipated every tactic and had prepared responses that were precise and effective without needing to show off. At one point, a witness presented a statement that seemed to favor the opposing lawyer's case. Lila listened carefully, asking a few gentle but pointed questions. These questions were framed in a way that seemed innocent on the surface, but cleverly revealed inconsistencies in the witness's testimony. The judge raised his eyebrows, noticing the subtle shift, but he still refused to openly admit that she was extraordinary. Throughout this part of the trial, Lila's quiet confidence began to win respect from the spectators and even from some members of the court staff. Her ability to maintain humility while demonstrating undeniable skill made her increasingly compelling. She did not dominate the room with her voice or gestures. Instead, she dominated it with her intellect, observation, and strategy. The opposing lawyer, realizing he had underestimated her, grew visibly tense. His arguments became sharper, but so did her counterpoints. Lila's strategy was patient. She allowed him to speak fully, absorbing every detail, and then responded in ways that highlighted flaws without attacking personally. This subtle approach made her victory not just possible, but inevitable, though the courtroom did not yet fully grasp it. As the hours passed, Lila carefully navigated the complexities of the case. Her presence was almost meditative. She seemed calm, focused, and aware of every detail. Every word spoken in the courtroom was measured against her understanding of the law and the evidence. She did not rush, she did not panic, and she did not allow the judges or the opposing lawyer's confidence to sway her. By mid-afternoon, the energy in the courtroom had changed. Spectators who had assumed she was inexperienced were now observing her with awe. Lawyers and staff whispered quietly about her intelligence, noting how effectively she dissected arguments and pointed out nuances that even seasoned attorneys sometimes missed. Even the judge's smirk began to fade, replaced by a cautious wariness. He realized that perhaps his initial judgment had been premature. Lila continued to build her case piece by piece, each argument carefully placed to challenge assumptions and reveal truths. She did not boast or exaggerate her points. She relied on precision, clarity, and logic. Her simplicity was a tool, a method to make her insights more striking. Every detail mattered, and she ensured that the court understood each point fully without ever appearing aggressive. By the end of the day, the courtroom atmosphere was transformed. Lila had silently asserted her competence, and the judge, who had mocked her earlier, began to recognize the intelligence and skill that had been hidden behind her humble exterior. The opposing lawyer, frustrated and slightly unnerved, knew he had miscalculated, and the spectators were captivated, witnessing a quiet triumph that was both unexpected and inspiring. When the session adjourned, Lila gathered her papers and briefcase once again. She moved with the same calm grace, leaving the courtroom without drawing unnecessary attention. People lingered in their seats, talking in low tones, reflecting on how appearances can be deceiving. The day had started with mockery and assumptions, but it had ended with awe and newfound respect. Outside the courtroom, Lila paused for a moment, taking a deep breath of the crisp air. She allowed herself a small private smile. The trial was far from over, and the most important moments were yet to come. But she had already begun to reshape perceptions, quietly astonishing everyone with her intellect and composure. In her mind, the strategy was unfolding perfectly, and she was ready to continue this careful, deliberate work, confident that the truth and her skill would speak louder than any assumptions or preconceptions. When the courtroom reconvened the next morning, the tension in the air was palpable. Spectators filled the benches, eager to see how the case would unfold after the surprising events of the previous day. Lila entered quietly, as always, carrying her briefcase and wearing the same unassuming attire. Her calm presence immediately drew attention, though it was subtle and not boastful. She was like a still lake, seemingly gentle on the surface, yet holding a deep current beneath. The judge, still slightly uneasy after observing her precise handling of the previous session, tapped his gavel and began the proceedings. His voice carried an edge, and there was a hint of lingering doubt in his tone. He asked her a series of questions meant to test her knowledge further, and Lila responded with the same quiet confidence she had shown before. Every answer was precise and considered, never defensive, never brash. To the casual observer, she remained polite and humble, but her responses carried a depth that was impossible to miss for those paying close attention. The opposing lawyer attempted to regain his footing. He spoke with renewed force, presenting evidence he believed would corner Lila and prove her wrong. He assumed that her calm exterior hid inexperience. However, Lila listened intently, her eyes scanning the documents, her mind connecting details that others overlooked. She noted contradictions and subtle gaps, understanding instantly how to exploit them without making it obvious. Her presence was quiet, almost serene, yet every movement of her pen, every glance, suggested a meticulous strategy forming in real time. She began to address the points raised, not with confrontation but with clarity and logic. Her language was simple, her explanations straightforward, yet they carried weight. Each argument she made dismantled the opposing lawyer's points slowly but surely, leaving no room for easy rebuttal. The judge, who had been confident at the start, now found himself leaning forward, listening more carefully than ever. He had expected simplicity but was confronted with sophistication. The courtroom audience felt the shift as well. Murmurs traveled quickly through the benches as spectators began to understand that Lila's calm, gentle demeanor was misleading. The woman they had assumed to be inexperienced was now revealing a keen understanding of law and human behavior. Even the court staff, usually quiet and reserved, exchanged surprised glances, acknowledging the unusual competence she displayed. One by one, witnesses were called to the stand. Lila asked questions that seemed casual, almost conversational, but in reality they were precise probes designed to reveal the truth. She never raised her voice unnecessarily, never tried to dominate the room, and yet every point she made left an impact. Her approach made the witnesses uneasy in subtle ways. They sensed they could not hide anything from her careful observation. During the cross-examination, Lila discovered discrepancies in the statements given by the opposing lawyer's witnesses. She highlighted these inconsistencies with questions that appeared innocent, but were carefully designed to lead the court to notice the truth. Each small revelation strengthened her case, even as she maintained an air of humility. The judge, initially skeptical, now began to realize that he had misjudged her entirely. His eyebrows knitted together as he followed her line of reasoning, struggling to maintain his previous air of superiority. The opposing lawyer's confidence began to crack. He attempted to interrupt her, to challenge her points aggressively, but Lila remained unshaken. Her voice was steady, her logic unwavering, and each time she responded, she did so with measured calmness. She did not resort to anger or defensiveness, which made her arguments even more compelling. The more she spoke, the more the courtroom leaned in, hanging on her every word, drawn to the quiet authority she exuded. Lila continued to dissect the evidence. She traced timelines, pointed out overlooked details, and connected the dots with a clarity that was almost artistic. The opposing lawyer fumbled occasionally, realizing he had underestimated the depth of her preparation. Every step she took was calculated yet natural, as if it were effortless. Spectators were captivated, recognizing that what they were witnessing was more than ordinary legal skill. It was mastery hidden behind a simple facade. The judge, now visibly intrigued, tried to regain control. He asked her a pointed question about a specific legal precedent, hoping to challenge her expertise. Lila paused for a brief moment, then answered clearly, citing the precedent accurately and explaining its relevance in simple, understandable terms. Her ability to make complex legal concepts accessible stunned everyone. Even those unfamiliar with the law could grasp her reasoning, and the courtroom collectively held its breath as the opposing lawyer struggled to respond. As the trial continued, Lila started to subtly challenge assumptions made in the case. She did not attack the opposing lawyer directly. Instead, she highlighted flaws and inconsistencies in a way that felt natural and calm. Her questions encouraged witnesses to reveal truths they might have otherwise hidden, and she drew attention to details that were previously overlooked. With every step, she built a web of logic so strong that it was impossible to ignore. The tension in the room was palpable. The judge, the lawyers, and the spectators all sensed the growing shift. The woman they had underestimated was now clearly the central figure of the trial, and her quiet authority commanded attention without a single raised voice. Her strategic restraint contrasted sharply with the aggression of the opposing lawyer, and it became increasingly clear who held the upper hand. During a particularly critical moment, Lila identified a key piece of evidence that had been misrepresented. She brought it to the judge's attention calmly, explaining its significance and showing precisely why it altered the case. The judge leaned forward, absorbing her explanation, realizing the gravity of her insight. The courtroom was silent, the weight of the revelation settling over everyone. Even the opposing lawyer could not argue effectively against the clarity of her logic. Throughout the day, Lila continued her methodical approach. She remained polite, composed, and focused, never allowing the drama of the courtroom to affect her. Every statement she made, every question she asked, built toward a larger strategy, one that would ultimately reveal her true brilliance. Spectators whispered among themselves, marveling at her skill and the subtlety with which she executed it. By the end of the day, the courtroom had undergone a transformation. Lila's presence, once underestimated, had become undeniable. The judge, the lawyers, the witnesses, and the spectators all recognized the intelligence and preparation she brought to the case. Her quiet, unassuming demeanor had masked a mind capable of extraordinary insight, and the impact of her methodical work was becoming clear to everyone. As the session concluded, Lila gathered her notes and briefcase once more. She moved with the same calm, measured grace, leaving the courtroom as she had entered. The spectators lingered, talking quietly among themselves, reflecting on how a person's appearance and demeanor can be misleading. They had witnessed a transformation from mockery to astonishment, and the anticipation for what would happen next grew. Lila had shown that true skill and intellect could remain hidden in plain sight, and the next phase of the trial promised to reveal even more about the remarkable attorney behind the humble exterior. Outside the courtroom, she paused briefly, taking in the sunlight and the quiet bustle of the courthouse. Her calm, steady gaze reflected the confidence she carried within. The trial was far from over, but she had already begun to change the perceptions of everyone who had doubted her. Lila's strategy was unfolding perfectly, and she was ready to continue with the same patience, intelligence, and quiet brilliance that had already begun to astonish everyone around her. The following morning, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Word had spread quietly through the courthouse about the unusual events of the previous days. Spectators were filled with curiosity. Lawyers whispered among themselves, and even the court staff seemed unusually attentive. Lila entered as she always did, quietly, carrying her briefcase, dressed modestly, her calm expression unchanged. The difference now was that everyone watched her closely, some with admiration, some with curiosity, and others with disbelief. The judge, who had been so quick to mock her at the start, shifted uneasily in his seat. His initial confidence had been shaken, replaced by a subtle tension. He had underestimated her, and though he tried to maintain his composure, there was an unmistakable awareness in his eyes that this was no ordinary opponent. He tapped his gavel to start the proceedings, but his usual smirk was gone, replaced by a thoughtful frown. Lila began to speak, her voice steady and measured. She addressed the court with simplicity, explaining complex points in clear, accessible language. Each word was chosen carefully, and though her tone was calm, it carried authority. The courtroom listened intently. Even those who had doubted her could not ignore the precision and clarity of her reasoning. What had seemed ordinary before was now revealing its depth. The opposing lawyer tried to regain control, presenting what he thought were unassailable arguments. But Lila listened patiently, absorbing every detail, noticing inconsistencies, and waiting for the perfect moment to respond. Her approach was strategic. She allowed him to reveal his weaknesses without rushing, making each flaw more evident to the court. Then, at a critical moment, she addressed the judge directly, highlighting a legal precedent that had been overlooked in the earlier arguments. She spoke with a calm authority that contrasted with the judge's astonished silence. Her explanation was straightforward, yet it revealed a thorough understanding of the law, showing that she had not only studied the case meticulously but also anticipated possible objections and prepared counterpoints for each one. The courtroom reaction was immediate. The spectators leaned forward, murmurs spreading as the realization sank in that this seemingly simple woman possessed extraordinary legal skill. The opposing lawyer's confident posture faltered. He had assumed he could manipulate the courtroom with his aggressive style, but Lila's calm, precise reasoning was dismantling his strategy piece by piece. As the trial progressed, Lila continued to challenge critical points subtly but effectively. She asked questions that seemed innocent, but exposed contradictions in the opposing witnesses' statements. Her strategy was delicate yet powerful. She did not appear confrontational, and yet her words carried an undeniable force. The judge, forced to follow her logic carefully, could no longer hide his surprise. Spectators who had once underestimated her were now captivated. Some whispered among themselves, recognizing that they were witnessing an extraordinary display of intelligence and composure. Even the court staff, usually reserved and professional, exchanged amazed glances. Lila's quiet presence was commanding attention in a way that demanded respect without ever seeking it. Then came the moment of revelation. When the judge asked her to state her professional background, expecting something modest, Lila calmly revealed that she was a highly accomplished attorney. Her modest appearance and gentle demeanor had been a choice, a strategic approach to observe the case, gather insights, and expose weaknesses without drawing unnecessary attention. She had been underestimated deliberately, allowing her to gather information and prepare for decisive moments. The courtroom was stunned. The judge, now clearly embarrassed, tried to maintain his authority, but it was difficult. He had mocked her at the beginning, assuming she was simple and inexperienced, yet she had proven otherwise. The spectators' whispers turned to admiration, as everyone realized that her intellect had been hidden in plain sight. Lila's composure never wavered. She explained her approach to the case, showing not only her brilliance but also her ability to remain humble and professional under pressure. The opposing lawyer, struggling to regain composure, realized that he had misjudged her completely. Every point he had made was now being reconsidered under the light of her analysis. Lila's methodical, calm, and precise approach had turned the courtroom upside down. What had begun as a session of mockery and doubt had transformed into one of astonishment and respect. As she proceeded with her arguments, Lila demonstrated a mastery of legal principles, evidence interpretation, and strategic questioning. She dissected the opposing lawyer's points carefully, making each flaw obvious to the judge and the spectators without ever raising her voice or appearing aggressive. Her humility and grace made her brilliance even more striking. The courtroom was silent at times, hanging on her every word, realizing that appearances could be deceiving. Witness after witness was carefully guided through her questioning, each response revealing the truth and exposing inconsistencies in ways that were clear to all. Lila's ability to balance clarity with subtlety left everyone astonished. The judge, though still maintaining his position, could not help but admire her skill, even as he grappled with his own earlier misjudgment. The tension in the courtroom was matched by the growing sense of awe. Spectators whispered, trying to process the transformation. The woman they had assumed to be simple was now the center of attention, a figure of intelligence, calm strategy, and understated power. Even those who had initially dismissed her were forced to reconsider their assumptions. By the end of the session, Lila had established herself as not only competent, but extraordinary. The judge, the opposing lawyer, and the spectators had all witnessed a profound display of skill and intellect, delivered with humility and grace. The courtroom had shifted from an environment of mockery and doubt to one of respect and astonishment. Lila had shown that appearances were deceiving, and that true brilliance could remain hidden in plain sight. When the session concluded, she gathered her briefcase calmly, moving with the same steady grace she had maintained throughout. Spectators remained in their seats talking quietly, reflecting on how easily they had misjudged her. The opposing lawyer, humbled, recognized her exceptional skill, and even the judge acknowledged internally, if not openly, that he had underestimated her. Outside the courtroom, Lila paused for a moment, taking in the crisp air and the faint murmur of the courthouse. She allowed herself a small private smile. Her strategy had unfolded beautifully, and the perceptions of those around her had begun to shift. The most important moments were yet to come, but she had already begun to astonish everyone, quietly transforming the way they viewed her intelligence and capability. The final day of the trial began with a sense of anticipation that could be felt throughout the courthouse. Spectators had been talking quietly about the woman who had quietly and steadily gained the respect and attention of the courtroom. Lawyers, judges, and staff all seemed to wait, curious to see how the story would conclude. Lila entered as she always did, quietly and composed, her presence unassuming yet commanding in a way that drew attention without effort. The judge, now more cautious and attentive than at any point during the trial, tapped the gavel to begin. He had learned that underestimating Lila had been a mistake, and he maintained a careful watch over every move she made. The opposing lawyer, still shaken by the previous sessions, attempted to rally his arguments, but there was a noticeable tension in his posture and voice. The confidence he had carried before had been tempered by the realization that he was facing a truly formidable opponent. Lila began by calmly summarizing the case, highlighting the key points she had carefully prepared. She did this with simplicity, speaking clearly and naturally, ensuring that the entire courtroom could understand the significance of each detail. Her words were measured, deliberate, and persuasive, carrying the weight of authority without arrogance. The spectators listened intently, drawn into her narrative, while the opposing lawyer struggled to find openings for rebuttal. As she continued, Lila addressed the inconsistencies and errors in the opposing counsel's case. She asked questions that seemed polite and thoughtful, but each one revealed a gap or flaw in the evidence or testimony. Witnesses, once confident, now responded with slight hesitation as Lila guided the examination with subtle precision. Every question, every observation was a carefully placed step in her strategy, designed to expose the truth without confrontation. The courtroom watched as Lila's quiet mastery of the situation became impossible to ignore. Even the judge, who had been skeptical and dismissive at the start, was compelled to follow her logic closely. He noted her ability to remain calm under pressure, her patience in waiting for the right moments, and the clarity with which she explained complex points. Each demonstration of skill added to the growing respect and awe that filled the room. Then came the turning point. Lila presented a critical piece of evidence that had been misinterpreted by the opposing lawyer. She explained its significance in clear terms, highlighting how it fundamentally affected the case. Her analysis was logical, precise, and compelling, leaving no room for misunderstanding. The spectators gasped quietly, realizing the depth of her understanding. The opposing lawyer's attempts to counter were futile, as Lila had anticipated every angle and prepared responses that neutralized his arguments completely. At this moment, the judge asked her to confirm her professional background. Lila, with her usual calm demeanor, revealed that she was a highly accomplished attorney with extensive experience. Her modest appearance and quiet behavior had been intentional, a strategic choice to observe and prepare before revealing her full capabilities. The courtroom was stunned. Spectators whispered, and the opposing lawyer's expression shifted from surprise to disbelief. The judge, momentarily speechless, realized the depth of his earlier misjudgment. With her credentials now known, Lila continued to present her case, each argument more compelling than the last. She highlighted legal precedents, examined evidence thoroughly, and asked questions that exposed the weaknesses in the opposing side's case. Yet she did all this with humility and grace, never raising her voice or appearing aggressive. The courtroom was captivated, unable to look away, drawn into the calm, methodical brilliance she displayed. Witness after witness, piece after piece of evidence fell into place under Lila's careful guidance. She constructed a narrative that was both clear and powerful, revealing truths that had been overlooked. The judge, now fully engaged, followed her reasoning with admiration. Even the opposing lawyer, though defeated, could not deny the skill and intelligence she had demonstrated. Lila's quiet approach, patience, and strategic thinking had completely transformed the courtroom dynamic. By mid-afternoon, the outcome of the trial became increasingly apparent. Lila had dismantled the opposing arguments with logic and clarity, turning what had seemed like a challenging case into a clear victory. Her humility, combined with her intelligence and preparation, left everyone astonished. Spectators whispered in amazement, acknowledging the lesson they had learned about appearances and assumptions. The judge, finally regaining his composure, acknowledged her skill openly. He praised her preparation, her clarity of thought, and her calm authority. Lila accepted the recognition gracefully without arrogance, emphasizing the importance of fairness, evidence, and careful reasoning. The courtroom felt a collective sense of awe and respect, recognizing that they had witnessed an extraordinary demonstration of intellect and professionalism. As the trial concluded, the verdict was delivered in Lila's favor. The opposing lawyer, though initially confident, had been thoroughly outmaneuvered by her methodical and thoughtful approach. Spectators applauded quietly, some with tears in their eyes, moved by the story of a woman who had quietly, without fanfare, astonished everyone through skill, humility, and intelligence. The judge, humbled and impressed, nodded respectfully, acknowledging the lesson in underestimating others. After the court adjourned, Lila walked calmly down the steps of the courthouse. The crowd, still talking quietly among themselves, followed her with glances of admiration and respect. She did not boast or speak loudly. Her victory was carried in the calm confidence she displayed. People reflected on the events, understanding that she had not only won the case but had also challenged their assumptions and shown the power of quiet intelligence. Outside, the sunlight fell softly on the courthouse, casting long shadows. Lila paused, looking at the building she had entered as an underestimated figure just days before. A small private smile crossed her face. She had executed her strategy perfectly, changed perceptions, and inspired everyone around her. Her story became an example of how appearances can deceive, and how patience, preparation, humility, and intelligence can astonish even the most skeptical observers. As she walked away, the whispers continued behind her, spreading the tale of the woman who had quietly become the center of attention, the unexpected genius in plain sight. Lila had proven that true brilliance does not need to announce itself. It reveals itself in action, in thought, and in the quiet moments of strategic observation. And for everyone who witnessed her, it was a lesson that would not be forgotten.